Great. So, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Hardy. I teach in the English department here and also in the rhetoric program. And this semester, I get to teach a course that's connected to this symposium. I'm teaching one of 5 sections. We've been thinking a lot, my students and I, in that class about what it means to be on a campus that's this old, right? What it's like to be working, studying, living, where so many others have been before us. This room, for instance, has seen a lot of lectures, and so we've been told, for some of the early seminary students, this is where they had their final oral exam. So they would stand like right here and get grilled by the entire faculty. Think about that for a second.
We're going to do that tonight, right?
Okay. Now, I'm not going to say it's haunted, and I'm not going to weigh in on whether or not there are ghosts around here, but wherever we are on campus, we can at least feel like we're walking through the echoes of other people's lives. This afternoon session is taking us off campus to a place nearby. It may not feel as immediate to most of us, but if you've ever been to Merck's for pizza and garlic knots, or to Waterworks for a community theater production, to the Field of Dreams to watch a Little League game, or to Miller's Country Store for fresh donuts on a Saturday morning, then you may have passed by the historical marker for Israel Hill. We're going to learn a lot more about this place and its echoes from 2 expert interlocutors today. Caroline Emmons is Elliott Professor of History and the founding director of Hampden-Sydney's Center for Public History. She's on the steering committee of the University Studying Slavery Consortium, and fortunately for us, she's the co-chair of the 250th Anniversary Planning Committee, and this week, she is our ringleader extraordinaire. Our esteemed visitor this afternoon is Dr. Melvin Ely, William R. Kenan Jr. Professor of Humanities and History at William & Mary, and for his work there, he won the Virginia Outstanding Faculty Award. He has a new book coming out in 2026, and I think you have the galley proofs of it here, called A Terrible Intimacy, Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. However, he's here today to share insights from an earlier award-winning book, Israel on the Appomattox, a Southern experiment in Black freedom from the 1790s through the Civil War, which won the Bancroft Prize along with several other awards and was hailed by one critic as a brilliant job of detective work. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming these 2 scholars to our stage to talk to us about Israel Hill.
Can you all hear me? Are we on? Great. We will speak of Israel Hill, but not only Israel Hill, right? We will also speak of this hill. That is a great introduction. Thank you to Professor Hardy. And it's such a pleasure to welcome Professor Ely here. He has a big fan club in Prince Edward County for the groundbreaking work that he's done. So it is really an honor to have him as part of our 250th Symposium. And so we are excited to hear your insights as we commemorate this milestone.
Thank you.
I have shared a list of questions with you, and you have vetted them and had some thoughts on them. We will move through some or most or all of them, depending. We do want to leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you're ready, we'll jump in with the first one.
I am ready.
He's ready. Okay. So the title of our session comes from the original 1775 advertisement for the college, which discusses the founder's intent to establish the college despite, or perhaps because of, the quote, distractions of our times, which is in the original advertisement. So could you remind our audience what some of the distractions of our times might have been in the fall of 1775?
Well, I trust you don't need too much of a reminder, but I will venture one. April of 75 famously was the time when the battles of Lexington and Concord happened. So the Revolutionary War had begun, even though independence had not been declared. There was a non-importation agreement that a lot of colonists had signed on to, not to import anything from Britain, from earlier, I believe that was. Government in Virginia, as it had been constituted, had pretty much ground to a halt. And there was a shift underway to de facto government by conventions elected by the people. Royal governor was in flight, in retreat, if you want. or about to be. So what we're talking about is a situation where the society is not only on the brink of war, but war has begun. It's the period beginning of economic privation. The war wasn't going to come to Virginia for a while. I mean, it would be 1781 before that happened in a big way. But there were lots of hardships. There was a lot of political upheaval. So a part of your question was, to what degree was Hampden-Sydney founded in spite of that, and to what degree because of that? I don't think founded because of that, because the efforts to found Hampden-Sydney had begun earlier, at least as early as 1772. The Presbytery, I think, was trying to get a school. I'm not sure the word college was yet used, but they were trying to open a school. And those Presbyterians were some pretty dogged people, and I just don't think they were going to stop because there was a war on. They really wanted a school, and we can get to talking about why they might have really wanted a school when we talk about civic education. But I just think they were not going to be daunted. They had a project. By 75, they had some money for it, not a lot, some money, and they were just going to plow ahead and do what they were going to do. So that's my brief answer to that. I mean, there's more that we can say, I think.
That answer makes sense to me because I was raised in a Presbyterian household and my grandmother would not have been stopped by war, I feel sure, with things that she thought we, so I accept that answer fully. But despite all that was going on, let's move to what you just suggested. Why despite, or they were Presbyterian, but let's go beyond that.
Okay.
What did they think was so important in creating this new republic and the citizens who would lead that republic?
All right. Well, I think the answer has to do in part with Presbyterianism, in part not so much. Let's stick with the Presbyterians for a minute because we all know, and you're probably reminded around here from time to time, that among Protestant denominations, Presbyterians historically are the most intellectually oriented. And so it's not surprising that they would want a school. It's very much worth noting, too, again, as many of you know, that there is an intimate connection between this college and Princeton, or the College of New Jersey, as it was then called. And that too was a Presbyterian institution that had been founded, let's remember, not that long before Hampden-Sydney. Princeton, I'm an alumnus of there, and I should know what the date is. It's 1740-something that Princeton was founded. But the connections between the two schools are intimate. I mean, Samuel Stanhope Smith, the first president, educated there. I think he's the one whose wife was the daughter of President Witherspoon, the great president of Princeton. His brother, the second president, also educated there, as I recall. And the back and forth, John Holt Rice, Benjamin H. Rice, his brother, whom we're going to talk about later on in connection with my book, all educated there. And if you look at the records that we do have of where people from Prince Edward County went to school, I'm talking about the elite class now. A number of them went to Princeton. They went to Princeton, more than went to Princeton, to my knowledge, than went to William and Mary. So you've got that sort of engine driving what's going on here. The other thing I'll say, and this leads into another question, Caroline, that you had, has to do with civic education. By which I mean, anyway, what people need to know in order to be good citizens. And this is an opportunity to point out that although this was a Presbyterian institution, it wasn't narrowly sectarian from the beginning, I believe. No, I know for a fact that students of other denominations were welcomed. They were allowed to worship in other churches of other denominations. They did have services on campus twice a day, I think, Presbyterian services. But if you wanted to go to the Baptist church, nobody was going to stop you from going there. So there was a certain amount, even a lot of freedom of thought. And there was a belief that in order to have a republic, which is what the incipient United States was going to be, you had to have an educated leadership class. We all know this. We know that this was Jefferson's view. He founded the University of Virginia for that reason. Benjamin Franklin famously said, as you know, when he was asked after the Constitutional Convention, what kind of government do we have? He said, a republic if you can keep it. And the question is how you can keep it. The model, historical model that Republicans in the United States, the founders, looked to were classical models. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome in particular. And Rome had a lot to teach about what to do and a lot to teach about what the dangers are. Because the Roman Republic had only lasted a relatively brief time and had given way to the Caesars. And so the belief in among the founding fathers was that the Republic is a fragile thing. And the greatest threat to the Republic is what today we call populism, by which they meant that if you have a group of people who are dispossessed, poor, don't have a concrete stake in the system, a demagogue can come along and buy them off or wave some demagogic banner and enlist people in his ranks and take the place over. Question is, how do you avoid that? One way you avoid it is by having an educated leadership class and one that knows these lessons from classical history and understands what's at stake. Another way you avoid the loss of the Republic has to do with slavery, and we're going to talk later about slavery and how that fits into the thought of the founders. I may put that on hold for just a minute, or I can go ahead and talk about it.
You can do whatever you like.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. But this is not an original thought with me. There's a historian, Edmund Morgan, whom some of you have read works of, who wrote a book called American Slavery, American Freedom. And he and others have talked about the way that slavery, well, the question for him was, how did the nation that produced the Declaration of Independence, the idea that all people are created equal, also support slavery? And how, in fact, did some of the foremost proponents of American democracy hold slaves, in some cases hundreds of slaves? How do you reconcile that? One of the ways Morgan reconciles it is by saying that there was a fix, a remedy that Virginia had come up with for the problem of the fragile republic. And the fix was that if the dispossessed class, remember the ones that I said overthrew the Roman Empire when some demagogue came along and recruited them, if you can define those people out of the body politic altogether, put them in an entirely separate category, that's a partial solution to the problem. And the way America did it, or the way the southern part of America did it, was by having a slave labor force. People are defined outside of the body politic. And the corollary to that is that the white people who remain in the body politic feel a stake in the system and feel to some extent privileged, if you want to put it crudely, because they have a white skin. But there's more to it. There's more to it than that. You do give the right to vote. You do give certain rights to all white male people. And therefore, all white male people have a stake in the system. So if you're going to have a viable republic, that's the way you can achieve that. So my answer to your question about civic education is, on the one hand, the education that was purveyed at a place like this, on one hand, was about the most enlightened education that humankind had ever produced. And yet, it not only coexisted with, but some would say depended upon, a system that enslaved ultimately millions of people.
May I ask a follow-up to that? We are now also off script, as we've done.
And we're going to stay right there, right there. Yeah.
So that rationalization makes sense. We may not agree with it, but we can understand it. But we also know, and some of the students have read the famous letter that Patrick Henry wrote, in which he recognized that contradiction. And I'm paraphrasing him, but he says something like, "Who would think I, of all people, and yet I can't bear to lose the convenience that enslaved people." So he saw, and we know others of his generation saw, the contradiction.
They saw the contradiction. And this is my problem with people who say, well, Jefferson and those guys, they were men of their time. And it's fine to have 20/20 hindsight now. They were men of their time. Well, their time was a revolutionary time when all of these assumptions about hierarchy were being called into question. And we know they did question them. I mean, you can go to the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, and a number of Jefferson's famous sayings are etched into the wall there. And one of them is, "Nothing is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people are to be free." Another thing that he said is, heaven has no attribute in the event of a slave rebellion that can side with us. And many other, he knew it was wrong. He said, our children, we subject our children to see slaves in degrading postures of submission, and to see us in a position of brutal tyrants. And how can they grow up and not be deformed, mentally he meant, by what they're witnessing? So he knew. Richard Randolph, the man whose will freed, as it turned out, about 95 enslaved people, the ones who founded this Israel Hill settlement that wasn't far from here, he not only knew better, but he left a will setting the people free. You read his will, he spent more time denouncing slavery in his will than he spent talking about his wife and children. It is the strongest abolitionist tract you'll ever read, up to and including Frederick Douglass. So people knew. Patrick Henry knew. He said, yeah, it's unjust, but we can't give up the convenience. That's not the whole answer, though, because there were a number of people who would like to have done, in their heart of hearts, something about slavery in Virginia and elsewhere. St. George Tucker, foremost jurist in Virginia in the 19th century, came up with scheme after scheme to emancipate the slaves gradually. But he said, you can never eliminate slavery in Virginia, and Virginia is where he lived, if there's going to be any economic pain to white people, or if white people feel that they're going to have to live next door to free African Americans. He himself said black people had 10,000 times more grievances against people like him than the American colonists had had against Great Britain. 10,000 times greater. So in a just world, they would go free. In the world that he lived in, white people would never allow it unless, as George Washington said, it were done by slow, imperceptible degrees. If you spread it out over a century or two, maybe you could set enslaved people free, and you'd still have to remove them because white people wouldn't live in the same society with them. These are the liberal-minded people who were saying this because they were realistic. So that's one point of view. There's another point of view among intellectuals in Virginia, one of whom was a William and Mary guy, Thomas R. Dew, who said, no, slavery isn't an unfortunate happenstance. It's fortunate. It makes a better society because it trains white people to rule. If they can rule at home, they can rule the political system. It keeps the lower classes of white people contented, and it prevents them from rebelling, because as long as there's somebody below them doing the hardest work, they'll never rebel. Ultimately, you have white people saying, we're going to keep slavery because, by God, it's good, that it's the only proper situation for people of African descent. It's right. God ordained it. You can read it in the Old Testament. So we go from sort of embarrassed admission, like Patrick Henry's, we're only doing it for the convenience, ultimately to, we're going to hold on to this institution. By God, it's great. We really, really like it. And some of the people who said that got along fine one-on-one with black people. I can show you in my new book lawyers who defended black defendants against charges of rape, against all kinds of charges, went out of their way to place black orphans in good apprenticeships and so forth, but also were in the forefront of leading Virginia out of the Union in 1861 to fight to defend slavery. So you have all of these different kinds of mentalities of white people converging on one thing. And what is the one thing that they all converge on? I ask you. We're keeping slavery. I may feel bad about it. I may feel good about it. I may think it's just wonderful. But whatever I think, we're keeping it. And we'll fight a war to keep it.
Let's turn back a little bit and talk more about Richard Randolph in Prince Edward County. So can you say a little bit more? When was the will written that you just mentioned? And can you say something about the effects of that will? And maybe, because you've written about this in your book, there were people at Hampden-Sydney who took an interest in Israel Hill also.
Yeah. Richard Randolph was a member of the famous wealthy Randolph planter tribe of Virginia. He owned a plantation called Bizarre, and you've seen the historical marker for it. It's right the other side of the bridge over the Appomattox River, and that's where he lived. He had land on this side too, and he went to William and Mary, and he was a student of George Wythe, who I said St. George Tucker was the second most distinguished jurist. George Wythe was number one. He was the most beloved Virginian of his generation other than George Washington, although he's almost forgotten today. And I like him, and I bet Caroline does too, because he became the second most popular man in Virginia by being a teacher. That was his claim to fame. He had some political involvement too, but that was the main thing. And Thomas Jefferson was his student. Richard Randolph was his student. Wythe didn't write any treatises about slavery, but some students of his report that what he taught was that what was needed was simple abolition, not abolition with deportation, not gradual, slow, imperceptible degrees, abolition. And Richard Randolph soaked that up. And in 1796, he sat down at his mahogany desk over there across the river, about 8 or 9 miles from here, and he did a very strange thing for a 26-year-old, and that is he wrote a will. And we don't know why he wrote it. There's no sign he was terminally ill. His brother was as surprised as anybody when he then promptly died. I don't think it was suicide, but he did promptly die. And the will, as I said, condemns slavery in no uncertain terms. He calls it robbery, kidnapping, theft, ruthless exploitation. He begs, I quote, "I beg, humbly beg the forgiveness of my own slaves for the wrongs that I've done them." And he calls for all of his enslaved people to go free and for 400 acres of his land to be carved out among them so that they would have the material wherewithal to maintain themselves in freedom. One of the arguments against emancipation was, how will these people support themselves? He said, okay, I'll tell you how. We're going to have reparations. He didn't use the word. But here are the reparations. Now, he died, as I say, promptly, and it took his widow 14 years before she actually freed these people. But to her credit, she did so. I think they sold some of them in order to be able to free the rest. And I could go into the economics of why that was necessary, but I won't bother you with that. In 1810, 1811, Christmas, New Year's, they freed about 95 people. And they divided up, as it turned out, 350 acres among 9 families. And then there were a few others who didn't settle on that land, settled elsewhere in and outside of Prince Edward. And that was Israel Hill. We have no record of why they called it Israel Hill, but I'm sure I know why, and I bet you do too. If you were newly freed from slavery, why would you call the place Israel Hill? Anybody? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the promised land of a little nation freed from slavery, brought as if by the hand of God into a promised land. I'm sure that's why they called it Israel Hill. And that settlement, that community was there as a community well into the 20th century. I've interviewed people who grew up there. I mean, I did this years ago. They're all past now. So this was a community of free people, proud free people that lasted. There were white people who wrote about it at the time on a couple or 3 occasions, attempting to prove that this experiment was a failure, that it had degenerated, that people had become criminals, ne'er-do-wells. And so, no, I prove in my book, chapter and verse, that is not correct, because I read all the primary records I could get my hand on. This was, now there were a few people in there who were less successful and less upstanding. Perhaps most people did quite well. They bought other land, lots in Farmville. There were 4, 5, 6, 8 lots in the town of Farmville that were bought up by black people. The First Baptist Church in Farmville, there on Business 15, that church there, not that building, but that congregation was founded by a white pastor in the 1830s, and the first 2 to join were free black people from Israel Hill, free black men, who were promptly joined by 20-some white people who apparently thought there was nothing unusual about joining a church founded in part by black folk. So that's, in a nutshell, the Israel Hill story. There's way more to it than that, but time is limited.
Well, could you give us a sense of, for those who may not be familiar with this time period, how unusual is Israel Hill when you look at the history of the South or of Virginia during this time period?
A contiguous landholding community of free black people is unusual, but not unique. There are others in Virginia, a few others that I know about. Setting people free was not particularly unusual, but most people who did so would set free 1 or 2 sort of favorite people, or they would set people free and not provide the land. Now, an important exception here, well, I'll give you 2. One is, I'll give you one in the interest of time, and that's George Washington. None other than George Washington, in his will, called for all the enslaved people who were under his control. There were some that were part of his wife's parents' estate that he couldn't legally free. All of his were to go free, and they were to receive concrete support, help in setting up as free people. And I'm really relieved that he did that because I'm just glad that the father of our country actually did that, because it would be pretty embarrassing if he didn't do at least that. I mean, the embarrassing part is he waited and did it in his will, but at least he did that, unlike Jefferson. The only people that Jefferson freed were his own offspring. And he did that because their mother made him promise to do that. I think she said she wouldn't come back from Paris with him if he didn't agree to do that. So there are other instances. There were lots of free black people in Virginia. In the 1850s, 1 out of every 9 or 10 African Americans in the state of Virginia was free already. 10% already free before emancipation. So I think free black history in Virginia is actually an important thing. And I'd say that even if I didn't write a book about it. Or you could say I wrote a book about it because I thought it was important.
Well, this is helpful, I think, when you think, you mentioned Washington's will, as we think about civic virtue, and we also think about these founders of both the college and the nation, and there's a tendency to create the marble man who is beyond reproach and who lacks the complexity that we know all people have. And so this is a complicated topic. This is a hard topic, but it gives us a chance to interrogate. They can be aspirational even though they failed themselves to live up to those aspirations in some ways.
Well, yeah. Well, let's talk about a couple of Hampden-Sydney people.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about John Holt Rice, who, for all intents and purposes, was the founder of the seminary, which is now
which we're sitting in.
Which we're sitting in the building of. John Holt Rice said that more than once that slavery was without question the most grievous political evil ever to afflict America. Is definitely wrong. Slavery was definitely wrong. He didn't set anybody free, and he didn't, as you might put it, crusade for abolition because, and I jotted this down, I think I've got his view on this. He wrote, "I am convinced that anything we can do against slavery will injure religion and retard the march of public feeling in relation to slavery." Now that's an argument that got made a lot. Let me parse that out. To agitate against slavery would pose an impediment to getting rid of slavery. Does that make sense to you?
Not really.
At the time, it made sense to people, sincere people who wanted to believe that, because the idea was if you agitated against slavery, it would stiffen the backs of those who were defending slavery. So the way to get rid of slavery was not oppose it and let it somehow automatically happen over a period of generations. Now, to be fair, Rice's wife, his widow, Anne S. Rice, did liberate people. In the 1850s, she liberated 10 or a dozen enslaved people and financed their resettlement in Liberia. And I think gave them pocket money as well. So she shared his views and then in the end acted on them. But by the 1850s, that's rare. You don't get many manumissions, many liberations of enslaved people by them. When you get them, you get some dramatic ones. There was another one in Prince Edward County. I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. Freed several dozen and provided, I think it was $50 in gold to each one of them to finance the voyage to Liberia, which is the only place he figured they could go and have any kind of life. 1850s America is no kind of place to, 1850s Virginia is not that promising a place to live if you are black. So throughout the period, there are white people of conscience who actually act on the conscience. And then there are white people of conscience, if you want, who don't act on it, having persuaded themselves that to act is to undermine the very thing that their conscience tells them is right. Well, that's a cul-de-sac right there. That's a moral cul-de-sac that there's no way out of. Well, that's what a cul-de-sac is, right? No way out.
So, other Hampden-Sydney, there was another case from your book that you said your new book. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the approach that you took? I'm interested in your methodology with your new book.
All right, well, I just got this week what are called the bound galleys. This is a preliminary copy that they send out to reviewers, so that reviewers will have 3 or 4 months to postpone reading it, and then read it take 3 days before their deadline. And this is what it looks like. It's got a pretty cool picture on there, and I'd like to take credit for that, but all I did was go online and find this picture. I don't know who these people are, but the title is A Terrible Intimacy, Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. And so here's your interracial life. Now, who these people are and what their interracial life is, I don't know, but the expressions on the face are so evocative that it's supposed to make you start hypothesizing, right, what those relationships may have been, and that's supposed to make you buy the book. Now, the subtitle is Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. Well, here I'll say a word about marketing books. And I'll go back to the previous book, Israel on the Appomattox. Why is it called that? It's about Israel Hill, but it's about much, much more than that. I mean, it quickly became a history of the entire free black community of Prince Edward County. But Israel Hill is sort of the thing that got me started, and it's really cool and interesting, and it's got a nice name. And so I decided, okay, this is going to be in the title, Israel, right? And Appomattox is going to be in there so that people who are Civil War fans will buy the book thinking it's about the Civil War, even though it's not. All right, so this one says Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. Well, my publisher thought, all right, the book is about interracial life in Prince Edward County, Virginia, period. And a little tiny corner of Cumberland, it sort of leaks over into a little bit of Cumberland. We said slaveholding South because it sounds less parochial that way. But what this is based on 6 criminal cases in Prince Edward County from which we have testimony or good documentation. 6 cases that involve interracial life. There's one where an enslaved guy and his overseer spend the morning getting drunk on whiskey, and in the afternoon they get in a fight where one of them kills the other one. And I'm not going to tell you who kills whom. Buy the book. The second chapter is about a black man and an enslaved white man who are friends, and they become partners in crime, and in fact, a very terrible crime. The third chapter is about an enslaved black man whom a young, well, not so young, a 30-ish white woman accuses of rape, and what then happens. And I'm not going to say what then happens because that would be a total spoiler. Chapter 4 is about a slaveholder, middling slaveholder. This is the one who lives about 6 feet over into Cumberland, who actually starts a family with an enslaved woman who belongs to a man who lives over here. And what happens with and to that family in the end, and by the end, I mean up to 1945. The 5th chapter I'll tell you about in a minute And the sixth is about one of the wealthier men of Prince Edward County who was killed by one of his enslaved harvesters about half a mile from Farmville shortly after the Civil War started. And what happened in the murder trial of the enslaved man who did that and why he did it, why he killed this white man. But now back to chapter 5, because that's the one that's about Benjamin H. Rice. Benjamin H. Rice was the brother of John Holt Rice. Like John, he was a Presbyterian clergyman. Like John, at one point he was the president, or whatever the title is, of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of the whole United States. This is two brothers from one place who both held that job. That's how important these guys were. Benjamin Rice spent the first half of his career preaching in Virginia. Then he took a pulpit in New York City for 3 years, and then he took the pulpit of the Presbyterian Church at what we now call Princeton University for another 15 years. And then he came back here. And after he came back here with his two grown daughters, he hired an enslaved woman from somebody else. I imagine she was a house servant, although I don't know. She decided to get married. She and the two Rice daughters decided that they would have a nice wedding. And they really got to planning a wedding the way people who like to plan weddings. I didn't say anything about gender here, but people who like to plan weddings. And they decided, okay, we're going to have written invitations. This is to enslaved black people, right? That's who's going to be invited. We're going to have written invitations. We're going to have this. We're going to have that. And so they send out the invitations. They have the ceremony at Rice's place. And Rice, I should say, or I guess I did say, he became the minister at the college church here, right? And he lived on a place right next to here. I don't know right where it was, but within spitting distance of this campus. I could be looking at the place right now, for all I know. And so that's where they had the wedding ceremony. 40 guests. They're going, it's 11 o'clock at night. Now here I should say, it was against the law in Virginia to have a gathering of enslaved people at night. At all. I mean, it didn't matter whether they had permission. It didn't matter if they were being, at all, against the law. Now, this was a gathering. 11 o'clock at night, and the slave patrol rides up. 3 to 5 white guys, armed, come up and they demand to see everybody's passes. Well, the passes actually are irrelevant, because even if you had a pass, it's illegal to be there. But they did ask for passes, and some of the folks had them, and some of the folks didn't. And Rice said, in his submission to the court, he didn't even ask anyone for passes. And by the way, this was quite typical. I mean, there's a myth that if you were enslaved, you couldn't go anywhere off of your owner's property without a pass, day or night. And I'm here to tell you, it didn't work like that. Why? Because the owners were that liberal? No, because it's a pain in the neck to write passes all the time. It's a pain in the neck to demand them. What? Every white person riding down the road is going to ask every black person he sees, show me your papers? That didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. So here they are. The patrol says, let me see your passes. Already they don't know their job because passes don't matter. The ones who have passes, they sent them home. The ones who didn't have passes, they took them around to where Rice couldn't see and whipped them, which the law entitled them to do. The law entitled the patrol to apply so and so many lashes. I've forgotten whether it was 20 or 39 or to anybody that they found out and about that wasn't supposed to be out and about. And so Rice himself got charged with violating the law against illegal assemblages, because the law was aimed at white people, right? If you're white, you're not allowed to do this, and if you do it, you can be fined $5 per person. So he could have been fined a heck of a lot of money. So he writes a plea to the court. This is why the case should be dismissed. And the main reason he gives is, no, two reasons. One is, I've lived outside of Virginia for 18 years and I didn't know. Well, he spent the first half of his life in Virginia, and the law was the same when he left as when he came back, so I think he knew. Second, he said, nothing in the conduct of my neighbors led me to believe that it was a problem to do something like this. This I do believe. There were gatherings of enslaved people at night, a lot. People had quiltings, they got together on Saturday night, enslaved people were moving about all over the place. Men were going to visit their wives on other plantations. One of the abuses of slavery, right, is that spouses often didn't live together, but on Saturday night you can go over there, visit, have a quilting, have a dance, play some music. They're happening all the time. Now, this particular patrol were what, in technical language, we call hard asses. And I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure whether they were thinking, oh, well, this guy, you know, he's high and mighty. We'll show him a thing or two. Or he's lived in the North. We'll show him, don't you bring those Yankee ideas. I don't know why they did this, but they did it. He appealed to common practice in Prince Edward County, and the charge was dismissed because everybody knew it was common practice. But the thing about slavery is that just because somebody does something and doesn't follow the rules doesn't prevent somebody who wants to follow them from coming along and applying them at the end of a whip. That's the way most enforcement systems work, right? It's not that everybody who ever does anything is punished instantly. It's that enough people are punished enough of the time that you have to ask yourself once or twice or three times, am I going to do this? Is it worth the risk? So Rice did get off, but I think it's probably a while before he had another gathering like that. And what it goes to show for me is that there was a great, great variety of behaviors out there. The way white people behave towards black folk, the way a white individual behaved towards an individual black person, and vice versa. And one of the reasons that could be the case was because of slavery. My thesis in Israel on the Appomattox is that slavery was such an effective system of keeping the race thing under control that white people could afford to cut some slack here and there. White people could afford to be a little bit lax here and there because in the big picture, the thing was under control. So people say to me, well, in your books, you show white people being lenient. I say, yeah, I show them being lenient here and there. And the reason they could afford to be lenient was because they felt secure as citizens, slaveholding citizens of a slaveholding republic. So that's chapter 5 of this book.
And some would say the veneer of benevolence made them feel better about the enterprise. That's it. And we're going to move to Q&A in just a minute, but I do want to add that your story, and I'm curious now where this gathering took place, because doing some research for the 250th on the relationship between enslaved people and students and others on campus, there was a cabin, I don't know where on campus, in the 1850s. Richard McIlwain, a president of the college student and then president of the college, wrote about gathering in a cabin with an enslaved man and his free wife who would entertain them and would prepare food for them, right, and would allow them to gamble and to smoke cigars, but not to drink. But that also suggests this kind of personal relationship. But we do need to go to Q&A. But please.
I am going to just say this, though. You say the veneer of
benevolence.
Veneer of benevolence. The thing is, it's not necessarily always a veneer. It can be perfectly sincere. The problem with it is not so much that it's a veneer as it is that it does absolutely nothing to really mitigate, much less get rid of the system of slavery. I mean, it's a type of consideration that can exist in a radically unequal society that once you get rid of that framework in 1865, the rules start to change.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions. So lots to think about. Any students, and then we're going to take questions from everyone. Any student questions? John?
So I was wondering if you could speak a little more briefly on specifically the students of Hampden-Sydney, the interactions they would have had with the institution of slavery, whether the campus might have been a spot for reinforcing those principles or perhaps pushing towards something new and maybe better.
I think, I don't know a lot about this, and I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I think that a student at Hampden-Sydney could be, in, let's say, the 1820s, the 1830s, exposed to the idea that slavery is morally questionable. I mean, if you were a student and you heard Benjamin H. Rice preach, or you had, I guess, John Holt Rice, if you had a class with him or something, you'd probably hear the idea mentioned, right, that slavery is morally questionable. I don't think you'd hear anything like abolitionism, because these weren't abolitionists. You would have contact with black folk because they had enslaved servants around here, right? Or people doing maintenance on buildings and whatnot. But in terms of the intellectual framework that you would get, this place had faculty who were enlightened by the standards of the time, and it had ones who were quite firm advocates of slavery. So you might have heard either one of those things.
Questions? Yes.
You mentioned that the liberation at Israel Hill was not unusual. What was the response of Prince Edward County and other plantation owners?
Yeah, Israel Hill was surrounded by big plantations. There were, as I recall, 3 plantations owned by white people on each of the 3 sides of that place. And what I find is that to the extent I find in the record interactions between the residents of Israel Hill and the planters who lived around them, it's, what shall I say, amicable. I mean, it's orderly. Some of the black folk might do some work for these people. They might sell them some things. The planter class, if you want to call them that, don't seem to have been freaked out by this, which in a way is surprising because those who lived around Mount Vernon and those who lived around Nominee Hall, where Robert Carter IV did the biggest manumission ever. He freed gradually 435, I think. There were white people there who protested. I don't find that in Prince Edward. What I do find is a couple of decades later, as I said, there's a fellow named James Madison, not the president, who wrote a published piece in which he declares Israel Hill to have degenerated into wantonness and laziness and so forth. But I think he's doing that for the outside audience because this James Madison himself, I can document, had business dealings with free black people. His lot in Farmville was right across the street from a free black entrepreneur. So one-on-one, he was okay. Ideologically, not okay.
Yeah, Blake?
So after working on your website, when referring to black people, always capitalize the word black. Yet when referring to white people, do not once capitalize the word white. My question is, why this deliberate choice of the word?
Because actually in Israel on the Appomattox, I don't capitalize either one of them. ever. In the current book, and I'm delighted that you've looked into the current book. That's a real compliment. Because I have been persuaded by the argument that black in the context of America, at least America in the 19th century, is an ethnic group, and white is not an ethnic group. In the same way that I can imagine a cookbook of black cuisine, but I can't imagine a cookbook of white cuisine. You know, I don't know what that would be. So it's a difficult call. You know, the Washington Post capitalizes both. Some capitalize neither. The New York Times capitalizes black and not white. And so I had to pay my money and take a choice, and that's what I chose. I beg your pardon? Well, I don't know. I mean, my wife is Polish American, and my family has been actually in Massachusetts since 1634, and the rest of them are rednecks from Southside Virginia. So I don't feel ethnic. Do you? I mean, a little. Yeah, I view myself as white, although I have some black ancestry, it turns out. You know, I spit into the test tube and I find out I'm part black. Any of y'all done that? I mean, not much, 1%. And it's in my mother's family from Appalachia. I thought it would be my dad's family from Southside Virginia, but no, around 1800, we had one black fellow step up to the plate in Southwest Virginia.
Okay, is it time?
And it had to have been a fellow. And if you don't understand why, I'll explain that to you after the talk. But I don't know. To me, white is just such a capacious. I mean, it's 300 million. What the hell is? You know, there. We could go on and on. I mean, my own feeling is that white is just a catch-all thing, and I'm speaking as I guess a not so proud small W white man. That's what I've got on that. I know it's not satisfying to you, but that's what I've got.
Well, on that thought-provoking topic, I'm sorry that we are out of time, but could you maybe come up and ask afterwards, yes, I apologize for that, but we are at a time. My timekeeper is telling me. So thank you very much, Professor Ely.